What's up, movie fans? Guys, Season 4 of Invincible recently ended, and originally I was going to make a full review of that season like I did with Seasons 2 and 3, but then I thought about it and I realized I kinda don't feel like it. The thing about Invincible is that this show has been so consistently good since it started without any real drops in quality, in my opinion, that I really don't have a lot to say about it anymore. Like, it's Invincible. It's the same old show with amazing writing and mostly good, sometimes subpar animation that people complain about way too much. I will die on that hill. And so, instead of doing another season review, I decided I wanted to do something a little bit different, and instead I am going to be ranking all 32 episodes of Invincible from the worst to the best. Before we get started, one little thing that I want to note is I will not be including the Adam Eve special. I don't really consider it to be an episode of Invincible. I kind of consider it to be its own little TV movie. But if you're curious, I really like the Adam Eve special, and I would probably put it at number 10. Anyway, getting into the ranking, number 32, the worst Invincible episode. I feel like everybody already knows what it is. Season 4, Episode 4, Herm. Obviously, this is one of the newest episodes of the show, and as soon as this episode came out, the entire internet pretty much unanimously agreed that it is by far the worst episode of the show. And yup, everyone is right about this episode. This episode is just an incredibly boring and odd filler episode. This episode is straight up filler. Fun fact, this is the first episode of the entire show not to be based on the comics. They made this storyline up for the show, and the storyline just really isn't that compelling to me. There were elements that I liked about it. I liked seeing Damien Darkblood again. I liked this weird fictional version of Hell. I liked Bruce Campbell as Satan. He was kind of fun. But the main conflict just doesn't have any weight to it whatsoever. The episode is so sluggish. It feels like they were just padding out the runtime, and I just don't really care for the villain at all. I don't really care for Darkblood's family, so yeah, just a boring episode that is easily the weakest one in the show. Number 31, Season 1, Episode 4, Neil Armstrong, Eat Your Heart Out. This is the one where Mark goes to Mars, and ever since I first watched Season 1, I've always kind of found this episode to be a bit of a weak link. It's not necessarily bad, but its story just isn't anything that special. Mark goes to Mars to protect some astronauts. The astronauts get captured by Martians. The Martians give Mark this big exposition dump about what the sequids are, and then Mark and the astronauts escape. That's the episode. It really just exists to set up the sequids for future seasons of the show. Otherwise, it's just kind of a boring episode. Number 30, Season 2, Episode 6, It's Not That Simple. This episode follows up on the cliffhanger from Season 2, Episode 5, and it follows up on that cliffhanger in a pretty awesome way. You get to see Rex get shot in the head, miraculously survive it, and then beat the crap out of the leader of the Lizard League, and that's always fun. But after the first 10 minutes where they resolve that cliffhanger, the rest of the episode is kind of just a boring calm before the storm episode. It's not necessarily bad, but it doesn't really have any action. It doesn't have any conflict. It's mostly just relationship drama between Mark and Amber. Side note, I've always found it funny that when the two of them are having their relationship drama in this episode, Amber goes to Eve for advice and Mark goes to Art, of all people. I've just always found that to be hilarious. Overall, not a bad episode, just not one that I'm particularly interested in. Number 29, Season 4, Episode 3, I Gotta Get Some Air. Another one of the newest episodes of the show. This is the third episode in the series thus far to revolve around the Titan subplot. And I'm gonna be honest here, I like Titan, but I feel like this subplot is starting to get a bit old. Every episode that we have Titan in just gets a little bit less interesting than the last. I still mostly enjoyed this one. I liked Titan manipulating Oliver for once instead of Mark. I liked the return of the Flaxens. I was pretty surprised when Robot and Monster Girl got trapped in the Flaxen dimension, and I'm very curious about how they're going to follow up on that in future seasons. But still, overall, I just didn't find this to be the most interesting episode. Number 28, Season 2, Episode 2, in about 6 hours, I lose my virginity to a fish, despite having easily the best episode title in the entire series. This episode is mostly just a bunch of miscellaneous subplots. It feels like with this episode, they had a ton of different issues from the comics that they wanted to adapt, but they didn't have time to do full episodes on those issues, so they just kind of condensed them all into this one episode. So you have Shapesmith joining the Guardians, Mark's rematch with Doc Seismic, Mark fighting Darkwing 2, and the fish plotline with the giant kaiju monster in Atlantis. And none of the plot lines are bad, but they're just not really that interesting compared to other episodes of the show. Number 27, Season 3, Episode 5, This Was Supposed to Be Easy, the second Titan episode of the show, and I actually like this one quite a bit more than Season 4, Episode 3, but it's still just not really the most interesting episode. It's just about Titan once again manipulating Mark and also Eve into fighting the mysterious dragon-turning crime lord Mr. Liu. I actually really like the final battle between Mark, Eve, and Mr. Liu, but for the most part, outside of that, it's just a standard Villain of the Week Invincible episode. Number 26, Season 3, Episode 1, You're Not Laughing Now. I find this to be the weakest of our season premieres, but it's still a pretty good episode. The highlight of this episode is really getting to see Doc Seismic, who was a total joke throwaway villain in the first two seasons, suddenly become a legitimate threat, which is pretty funny and entertaining, but outside of that, it's just not really that special. It does do a good job at establishing where our characters are at the beginning of Season 3. I like Mark interacting with Lex more. Mark confesses his feelings to Eve in this episode, so there's some good stuff in there, but it's just not a standout. Number 25, Season 3, Episode 4, You Were My Hero. This one is one of the most bizarre episodes in the show because it's kind of like two mini episodes condensed into one, since the first half of the episode is about Mark going to the future and fighting the Immortal, and the second half is about Nolan and Alan escaping from the Viltrumite prison. And I don't really care for the first plotline that much. I don't hate it, it's just never been that interesting to me. I just don't really find the Immortal to be an interesting character, and this is kind of a whole episode revolving around him. but the second half of the episode boosts it up quite a bit because I really enjoy Nolan and Alan together. Their escape was awesome, and I also really liked seeing Battle Beast again. Number 24, Season 1, Episode 6, You Look Kinda Dead. This is one that kinda gets worse in retrospect because in this episode, Amber dumps Mark for a reason that is actually kind of reasonable at first, and then in the next episode, you discover that Amber actually knew Mark was invincible the whole time, and her dumping him for a pretty stupid reason just kind of becomes annoying. But overall, I still enjoy this episode. I think D.A. Sinclair is one of the creepiest villains in the entire show. I think the Liana-Men are pretty creepy, and so yeah, I enjoyed Mark facing off against those things. Still, Amber's really annoying in this episode. Okay, so for reference, this is kind of where we crossed over our first major threshold on the list. Every episode below this point, I would give a 7 out of 10 to, except for Herm. That one's probably like a 5 or a 6. But from here on out, the next few episodes are 8 out of 10s, which means that we're getting into some really, really good ones. Number 23, Season 1, Episode 3, Who You Calling Ugly? This is a great early episode of the show. The first half of the episode revolves around Robot forming the new Guardians of the Globe, so you introduce characters like Shrinking Ray, Black Samson, and the best one, Monster Girl. You get Monster Girl humbling Rex, which is pretty epic because this is the point in the show where Rex was kind of unlikable, and then the episode ends with Mark going on his first date with Amber, and then Mark and Eve fighting Doc Seismic for the first time, who I think is just a hilarious recurring villain. Just a solid Invincible episode. Nothing that special, but a pretty fun early episode of the show. Number 22, Season 4, Episode 1, Making the World a Better Place. This is the first episode of Season 4, obviously, and I think it's funny because this one also kind of felt like a collection of a bunch of miscellaneous comic issues, but I actually enjoyed these stories a lot more than the ones in the Virgin Fish episode. I really enjoyed seeing Dinosaurus. I've heard that he's going to become way more important in the future of the show, and I thought he immediately came off as a very intimidating and interesting villain, so I'm excited to see more of him in the future. I liked Mark and Eve fighting Universa, and Eve discovering that she's losing her powers, and then the final fight of the episode against the Sequids was pretty tense, and the ending where Mark murders somebody was pretty shocking and definitely set the tone for the rest of the season. Number 21, Season 2, Episode 1, A Lesson for Your Next Life. This is just a solid first episode of a season that follows up on the events of the first season by showing that Mark and Debbie are still grappling with the trauma that was left behind by what Nolan did. But the episode also does a great job at setting up the rest of this season by introducing Angstrom Levy, introducing the concept of the multiverse, and giving Angstrom Levy a very reasonable motivation to be a villain. So yeah, I think this is a very strong season premiere, and it's actually my second favorite season premiere of the show so far. Number 20, Season 3, Episode 3, You Want a Real Costume, right? This is a significant episode because this is the one where Mark trains Oliver to be a superhero, and it's also the one where Mark gets his blue suit. And I really enjoyed all of that stuff. I think Mark training Oliver to be a superhero in Season 3 is so much fun because Oliver is just so eager to be a superhero in kind of an adorable, endearing way, but he's also not really ready for the moral implications of being a superhero, and he's willing to do some pretty dark stuff, like murdering the Mauler twins in this episode, which I've always just found to be one of the most shocking moments in the entire show. Number 19, Season 2, Episode 3, This Missive, This Machination. I enjoy this episode because this is an episode that actually doesn't have a lot of Mark. The episode starts with Mark starting college, and it ends with him going to Thraxa and encountering his father, but in the middle, you're really not following Mark at all. Instead, you're following other characters, mainly Alan, as he goes to the Coalition of Planets, and you get introduced to them, you get introduced to Thetis, and then the episode ends with Alan getting beat up by the Viltrumites, which was a shocking moment in the show because I had never read the Invincible comics before I watched this show, and I still haven't read them. So when Alan got beat up, I thought he died. Like, I thought that was it for him. I thought Alan was just done. That was a very shocking moment in the show's run. Outside of that, this episode has Robot and Monster Girl going on their first date, which was strangely wholesome, and it also has my favorite part of the episode, a heartbreaking subplot where Debbie goes to a superhero spouse support group trying to relieve some of the grief and pain that she feels over what Nolan did, only to have it increased by a man at that support group. And I've always just found that to be a really, really heartbreaking subplot. I felt so bad for her. Number 18, Season 2, Episode 5, This Must Come as a Shock. A very fitting title for one of the most shocking episodes in the entire show. When I started watching this episode and they had the Guardians going on these two separate missions to stop the Sequids and the Lizard League, I kind of thought, oh, so these are just going to be two kind of quick villain of the week storylines. They're probably not going to be that impactful. And then they both ended up being insanely tense, and the Lizard League one was brutal as Duplicate, Shrinking Ray, and Rex just get their butts kicked, and for a few moments you actually think that Duplicate and Shrinking Ray both died, and the episode just ends on an incredible cliffhanger. And so yeah, this one has always just stood out to me as one of the most shocking and memorable episodes in the series. Number 17, Season 1, Episode 2, Here Goes Nothing. I've always found this episode to be interesting because the first episode of the series is all about introducing Mark, Nolan, and Debbie, our three main characters. So this episode is all about introducing everyone else. In this episode, you're introduced to Rex, Robot, Cecil, Alan, Kate, and most importantly, Eve. And the episode does a really good job at immediately establishing who these characters are, making them likable, giving them great dynamics with Mark. And so I've always just found this one to be a great early episode of the show. I also really enjoy the Flaxen in this episode, and I love the way the episode ends with Nolan going to the Flaxen dimension and just absolutely massacring them, and meanwhile Mark and Debbie are talking casually, not knowing what he's doing over there. Like, yeah, just a really great second episode of the series. Number 16, Season 4, Episode 6, You Look Horrible. This is the weakest episode of the Viltrumite War episodes in Season 4, which says a lot about how good the Viltrumite War episodes are, because this is a great episode. The standout of it is Nolan and Oliver bonding with each other while Mark recovers from his injuries from the Conquest fight in the previous episode. I really enjoyed that stuff. I thought that it was very emotionally satisfying to have those two connect with each other. And I also really enjoyed the final battle of this episode on Telesquia, where the Coalition faces off against the Viltrumites. Plus, you also get Alan and Tech Jacket bonding with each other, which is just a lot of fun. So, yeah, not as climactic as the episodes surrounding it, but it is a very solid episode. Alright, here is our next threshold. From here on out, every episode higher than this point is a 9 out of 10 or higher, so now we're getting into the ones that I really, really love. Starting off, number 15, Season 1, Episode 5, That Actually Hurt. Our first Titan episode, and I have always found this one to just be a standout in Season 1. It's really a great case study of who Mark and Nolan are as characters, since Mark is such a selfless person that he is willing to put his life on the line to help a supervillain beat another much more powerful group of supervillains, and Nolan is so evil that he is willing to let his son get the crap beaten out of him just to make a point. It is a really great early examination of those characters. It's a really shocking episode, since this is kind of the first time in the series that you see Mark really get beaten up. I like the subplot about the Guardians of the Globe trying to work as a team that leads to them helping Mark in the final battle. The episode introduces us to Titan, Battle Beast, Machine Head. So yeah, just a great early episode of the show overall. Number 14, Season 3, Episode 6, All I Can Say Is I'm Sorry. One of the most heartbreaking episodes of the show, as Mark is forced to confront the consequences of his battle with Nolan in Season 1, when Powerplex, a villain who lost people in that episode, tries to kill Mark specifically. I think this entire episode is so sad and so compelling, because on the one hand, I kind of hated Powerplex, since he just does not take any responsibility for his own actions, and in the episode, he ends up killing his family. But I also felt so bad for him because he's just such a broken man. And it leads to one of the best villains in the whole show. And it also makes Mark way more interesting, since this episode kind of increases his self-doubts and self-hatred. And yeah, I just thought this was a very, very sad but good episode. Number 13, Season 2, Episode 7, I'm Not Going Anywhere. This is an episode that I don't think enough people talk about, because it's one of the most well-written episodes in the show. The first half of it centers around Mark and Amber trying to make their relationship work, and it's actually really compelling. And for a few seconds while watching this episode, I actually kind kind of wanted the two of them to be happy together. And then you get to this scene halfway through the episode that I think is one of the most well-written scenes in the show, where Mark and Amber are on a date. They're being really, really sweet, and it's such a sweet, wholesome scene. And then in 1 second, Anissa shows up, your heart drops, and it suddenly becomes one of the most terrifying and tense scenes in the show. I think Anissa is just a really, really interesting villain, since she's kind of the most reasonable Viltrumite we've been introduced to in the show so far. She's not like Nolan, Conquest, or even Thrag. She doesn't punch first, ask questions later. She actually talks to Mark and tells him why he should let Viltrum take over Earth. And I think that that's really, really interesting. And then the final scene where Mark and Amber break up is another one of the most well-written scenes in the entire show. So yeah, a very good episode that I think more people need to talk about. Number 12, Season 4, Episode 2, I'll Give You the Grand Tour. This one's just a vibe. It's Nolan and Alan going through the galaxy, collecting weapons and allies to help them beat the Viltrumites. It's just a really fun, entertaining episode. I love Nolan and Alan together. Their friendship is so great. And I also think this episode gives you a lot of insight into what Viltrum is really like, since you get these flashbacks explaining Nolan's backstory, you get your introduction to Thrag, and it actually makes the Viltrum Empire a lot more interesting, since you get to see firsthand how cruel and oppressive their society really is. And so, yeah, I think this is a great episode. I love the final scene between Nolan and Thetis, because getting to see J.K. Simmons and Peter Cullen acting against each other was just absolutely legendary. So yeah, great episode. Number 11, Season 1, Episode 1, It's About Time. This one's interesting to me because if you had told me to rank the episodes after I first watched this show, this episode probably wouldn't have gotten this high. But in retrospect, I think It's About Time is one of the most interesting series premieres that I have ever seen. It is really, really good at disguising the true nature of this show. At first, you think, oh, this just looks like a really sweet animated superhero show about a father who is the greatest superhero in the world and his son who is trying to live up to his legacy. It's really, really sweet. You know, this father and son have a nice bond. They have a lot of nice moments in the episode. Mark has a nice moment with Debbie. Just a really, really fun, great start to a superhero show. And then the episode ends with the father luring a bunch of other superheroes to an isolated location and murdering them all in the most brutal way possible. And you are left with your jaw on the floor wondering, what the heck is this show? It is such a perfectly crafted first episode, because no matter what, whether you enjoyed this episode or not, you are going to watch the next one. Alright, moving into the top 10. Number 10, Season 2, Episode 4, It's Been a While. This is the halfway point of Season 2 where Mark and Nolan reunite. And I think this was the perfect way to close out the first half of Season 2. The first half of Season 2 is all about Mark and Debbie dealing with the fallout of what Nolan did, and and dealing with the emotional trauma he put them through. So having Mark reunite with Nolan halfway through the season was just a stroke of genius. I think their interactions in this episode are so interesting, since Nolan is kind of new to this whole apologizing thing and isn't very good at it, and Mark is just having none of his bull crap. It's such a well-written episode. I really like the subplot about Debbie kind of moving on from the trauma that Nolan put her through and realizing that she doesn't need him. And the fights against the Viltrumites in this episode are really, really shocking, since this episode is kind of the first time in the whole show that you see how terrifying the Viltrumites can really be. You thought Nolan was bad? How about an entire planet full of people who are just as powerful as him and way more evil? Just such a well-written episode. Number 9, Season 4, Episode 8, Don't Leave Me Hanging Here. The most recent episode of the show. There was a lot of debate online over whether or not this was a satisfying conclusion to the season, and if you ask me, yes, 100%. This is the first season finale that doesn't have a big fight scene, so as a result, I do think it's the weakest season finale, but honestly, I don't think we needed a big fight scene. What we needed was this dark, somber episode all about the emotional toll that this season took on our main characters, and it's really compelling. Mark's PTSD scenes were really, really interesting and sad. I loved the scenes with Nolan and Debbie. I loved the scene with Nolan and Cecil. I love all of the interactions between Mark and Eve. I felt so bad for Eve in this episode when she tells Mark that she felt like she was basically forced to get an abortion because she could not raise this kid on her own if Mark died. And the final scene of the episode is so haunting, dude. Thrag confronting Mark and straight up telling him, "We are going to live on your planet now, and there is nothing you can do about it." That was just such a haunting way to close out the season. Number 8, Season 1, Episode 7, We Need to Talk. I think this episode was the first time it really hit me just how well written this show is, as all of the plot lines that you've been building up to throughout Season 1 come together in just this incredibly tense hour of television where Cecil and Debbie now know that Nolan is a monster. Nolan knows that they know, and so the entire episode is this tense race between the two factions as they're both trying to be the first one to tell Mark. And meanwhile, Mark just got dumped, so he's off on his own looking for relationship advice from Eve. It's just such a well-written, tense episode. I enjoyed the subplot with Robot betraying the Mahler twins. I really like Nolan just easily fighting back against all of the contingencies that Cecil has. And the ending of the episode where Nolan murders the Immortal again in front of Mark, and Mark is just there shocked, suddenly forced to come to terms with who his father really is in one earth-shattering moment. Just such a great penultimate episode. Alright, this is our final threshold. From here on out, every episode is a 10 out of 10. These next 7 episodes are perfect to me. They are the reason I love this show, and it was really, really hard to pick between them. But number 7 is going to have to be Season 3, Episode 2, A Deal with the Devil. The Civil War of the Invincible universe, as this episode features Mark and Cecil fighting each other, and just like with Civil War, I still do not know which one of them was really in the right. This is such a well-written episode because whether you side with Mark or Cecil, you're justified. Mark is right. These dangerous criminals should probably be in prison, but Cecil is also right that rehabilitating them and using them to help people is a really good idea that can save a lot of lives, and so it's a really compelling conflict. I still see people online debating, did Cecil go too far in this fight? Was Mark too irrational? Like, there's so many factors that are very, very interesting. I really like the Guardians of the Globe factoring into this, and you see how loyal they've become to Mark. And I also really like getting to see Cecil's backstory for the first time in the show, and I think that added a lot of dimension to his character in this episode. Number 6, Season 2, Episode 8, I Thought You Were Stronger. I think this is just a phenomenal season finale. It's very different from the Season 1 and Season 3 finales, since in this episode, Mark isn't going up against a villain who can beat him through pure strength. He's going up against Angstrom Levy, who is just this very, very intelligent villain who is very good at getting under Mark's skin. I absolutely hated Angstrom in this episode when he started threatening and beating Debbie. I really wanted Mark to just beat the crap out of him. And then you get to the end of this episode, and Mark does do that. He beats the absolute crap out of Angstrom, and instead of it being a satisfying moment, you're actually kind of watching in shock as Mark just killed somebody, even though Angstrom actually survived, for the very first time. And so, yeah, I just think this was a very, very well-written season finale. I loved all of the multiverse stuff. That was also a lot of fun. I like the Batman and knockoff Spider-Man cameos. Just, yeah, really great episode. Number 5, Season 4, Episode 5, Give Us a Moment. The first Viltrumite War episode in Season 4, and holy crap, what a start this was. I was not expecting the Viltrumite War to start with Mark's rematch with Conquest. I was expecting that to be a way later event in the season, so when Conquest shows up, I was just in absolute shock, and I thought the fight was so cool. It wasn't quite as good as the Season 3 fight, but it almost lived up to it, and it was one of the hardest and most brutal scenes to watch in the entire show. The other thing that I really like about this episode that also put it this high on the list was Nolan's reunion with Debbie, which I think is one of the most well-written scenes in the entire show. Nolan gives Debbie a legitimate apology, and Debbie just completely disregards it and refuses to forgive him because he really doesn't deserve to be forgiven, and Debbie is absolutely in the right. I thought the vocal performances in that scene were incredible, especially from Sandra Oh, and I think that's one of the best scenes in the whole show. Number 4, Season 3, Episode 7, What Have I Done? What's interesting about this episode is I actually knew about this episode before it came out. I heard people saying between seasons 2 and 3, you're not ready for the Invincible War, and I kind of put together, based on what people were saying about it, that it was going to be a big multiversal Invincible crossover, and I was very excited for this episode. I wasn't expecting it to be like this. I wasn't expecting this to be an absolute global catastrophe where the Invincible variants spread out over the whole world and just massacre a ton of people. I was shocked by how dark and epic this episode got. And it also got really, really sad since several characters die in this episode, most notably Rex. I think Rex's death scene is one of the saddest moments in the entire show. And then the ending of this episode, where the season basically says to you, we're not done yet. We've still got one more big threat that Mark has to face this season. I just thought it was such a great penultimate episode. Speaking of one more threat that Mark had to face this season, Number 3, Season 3, Episode 8, I Thought You'd Never Shut Up. The Conquest Fight. This episode easily had to come into the top 3 on this list just because of how insanely shocking and tense this fight is. I think it's so well done because it managed to make Conquest a terrifying villain in just the span of like 50 minutes, where you immediately learn there's no negotiating with this guy. This guy is out for blood. He doesn't care about the greater goal. He just kills people because it's fun. And as a result, the battle between Mark and Conquest was just so terrifying. I really did think towards the end of this episode that they killed off Eve for a few seconds, and I was going to be so sad and heartbroken. And then Eve resurrecting, burning Conquest's skin off, and Mark having this big final fight with him where he bashes his head in. It was just such a shocking ending to the season that really earned its place on this list. The only reason it's not at number 2 is honestly because I think it's a little bit too similar to the season 1 finale, since it's Mark fighting a Viltrumite on Earth and the Viltrumite killing a bunch of people to break Mark's spirit, but still, a really great finale. Number 2, Season 4, Episode 7, Don't Do Anything Rash. Since Season 4, Episode 8 is a very somber, introspective episode, this one is kind of the climactic final battle of the season, and it was climactic. I was not expecting this battle to be as epic as it is the entire coalition of planets facing off against all of the Viltrumites. It is an epic battle that I thought was great because every single one of our main characters and allies who we've been building up over the season gets a moment to shine. Except Oliver. Oliver's kind of useless, but still really, really solid episode with really, really solid action sequences. And the best thing about this episode is Thrag. I was kind of doubting that Thrag was going to live up to the hype in this episode because everybody on the internet for months was saying, you're not ready for Thrag. Thrag is going to blow you away. Conquest will look like nothing compared to Thrag. And I was just kind of like, yeah, okay, I don't know if he's going to live up to everything that you guys are saying he is. And then he did. He is a terrifying villain in this episode. He is just such a commanding, menacing presence who is terrifying because of how they immediately establish that he is the most powerful person in the room, no matter who you bring. And also, the moment in this episode where they destroy Viltrum, that was awesome. My jaw was on the floor for that entire sequence. But with all of that being said, number 1 is season 1, episode 8, Where I Really Come From. I feel like even though this entire show is amazing, nothing has really lived up to the emotions that I felt when I watched this episode. This is just such a heartbreaking episode as Mark is forced to come to terms in one terrifying moment with the fact that his father is a monster, and they do not hold back in how evil they make Nolan in this episode, with him just killing so many people for no reason. He's even terrifying verbally when he just straight up says to Mark that Debbie is nothing more than a pet to him. It is just such a heartbreaking episode as you see how evil Nolan really is. And then you get to the end of the episode, and it shocks you with such a sad, emotionally poignant moment where Nolan is about to kill his son, and then he just comes to a realization at the last second he can't do it. Because he really does love Mark, and he really does love the life he had with Debbie, even though he spent this whole episode trying to convince both Mark and himself that he didn't. And then you get one of the most heartbreaking lines in the show still. What will you have after 500 years? You, Dad. I'd still have you. It's just such an emotionally powerful episode. And even though every season of Invincible has been incredible, I don't think anything has quite lived up to the just sense of sadness that I felt when I was watching this episode. So it is the best episode of the show. There you go. That's my ranking of every Invincible episode. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like and subscribe. Comment down below what's your favorite Invincible episode, and see ya, movie fans. Number 4, Season 3,